Hi everyone, Miss Hart here. Today we're going to discuss one of the most significant events ever in human history, the Industrial Revolution. But before we start, I want you to pause this video and grab your notebook if you haven't already. I'd really like you to take notes on this lecture and to write down any questions you have for me in class tomorrow. Now, if everyone is ready, let's begin. The Industrial Revolution is hands down one of the most significant developments ever in human history. It's right up there with the Neolithic Revolution when early humans invented farming, domesticated animals. The Neolithic Revolution really transformed human history starting in about 10,000 BCE. In fact, it was the beginnings of human civilization and a really big moment in history. The Industrial Revolution is another such moment that transforms the world technologically, economically, demographically, basically in every way. So I just want to start with a little review of some of the major changes that occurred during the Industrial Revolution. We've already done a little bit on this in class. I just want to kind of review it and kind of go back to where this all begins for Europe. The Industrial Revolution truly transformed first Europe and then the world. First, the new technology that was created during this time, the 18th and early 19th centuries, really completely revolutionized the way that we produce goods, the way that we traveled, and really the way that we lived our lives. Inventions like the water frame and the power loom allowed goods to be mass produced in factories, while the steam engine, which you see in the picture here in the upper right-hand corner, is going to be used to create a new transportation methods like the railroad that are going to move both people and goods around at a much faster rate. It's really because of things like the railroad that things like suburbs are able to form, where people are able to live outside of the city and travel into the city every day for work. All of these changes are going to lead to people flocking to the cities in a process called urbanization. Now, remember that the word urban means city. So urbanization is just the process of people moving from the rural areas like the countryside to more urban areas, i.e. cities. Urbanization has been occurring in Europe since the early modern era, like 1450 onward. But now starting in 1750, industrialization is really going to intensify urbanization. So the process of industrialization is really going to kind of speed up the process of urbanization. The migration of people to the cities is going to start to be a lot more people at a much faster rate. It's basically going to speed up. Here you can see on this map that the number of cities has almost quadrupled when we compare the map on the left to the map on the right. There's a lot more of these little black dots that represent cities in the map on the right. People are clearly moving to very specific areas, and these small villages are going to turn into larger and larger cities eventually. But we kind of have to ask ourselves why people are moving to urban areas during this time, and the answer is jobs. Okay, people flock to the cities of northern England, like Manchester, looking for work. You see all the machines used to kind of grow and harvest food means that a lot less workers are needed in the countryside on farms. Those unemployed farm laborers are going to pick up and move to the cities, hoping to get a job in the factory. They're going to basically migrate for the purpose of finding a job. Before the Industrial Revolution, London was the only real city in England with about 250,000 people. During industrialization, people are going to flock to cities looking for job opportunities. The economy was no longer going to be tied to the land like it was for so long. It was really going to be tied to urban areas and really the innovations in production that are going to change the world forever. Certainly the mass migration of people from the rural countryside to the cities is going to completely transform the way that people live. I actually grew up on a farm. And when I went to college in a big city, let me tell you, my entire freshman year was spent overcoming culture shock. I literally spent the first 2 months of school being woken up at 5:30 in the morning as the Metro North train tracks ran alongside of my dorm. My body was so used to the quiet of the countryside that it took quite a while for me to adjust to the perpetual lights and sounds of living in a city. It really was culture shock. And culture shock that, from the rural areas where it's quiet, it gets dark at night, to like a big city where there's trains running all hours of the day and night. There's perpetual lightness because it never gets quite dark. I know it's hard for a lot of you to appreciate maybe, but this is a huge change for people. No longer are people going to have the space and privacy they once had, living in small villages with a couple hundred, some living even more isolated on farms with miles of farmland between you and your closest neighbor. Instead, people are going to live almost on top of each other in densely populated cities of first hundreds of thousands and eventually millions of people. Which brings me kind of to the impact of all this. Please notice that I've color coded the impacts now purple so that helps you kind of keep the changes, which were blue, separate from the impacts, which are now purple. So let's think about how urbanization is going to impact or affect people's lives and experiences. First of all, you have a massive amount of people moving to cities, and they're going to need somewhere to live. Little cottages just aren't going to do it, so a new kind of housing is invented, tenements. These are basically an early version of an apartment building, but probably not like an apartment building that any of us live in. These tenements were really crowded, sometimes 10 people living in a tiny one-room apartment with no indoor plumbing. It's going to be really crowded. It's not going to be very private. And frankly, it's going to be like a little dirty. We're going to start to see whole neighborhoods of these tenements crop up in cities, and they're going to start to look a lot like a slum. Now, this is not going to be a particularly nice place to live, and it's actually going to be kind of dangerous. You see these neighborhoods being overcrowded, lacking in any basic sanitation or running water. They're going to be full of diseases, which are periodically going to break out and kill large numbers of the working class. And it's not diseases just like cholera that are going to kill city dwellers. It's also going to be pollution. At this point in time, there are no pollution controls from the government, so the air is really thick with smoke from factories. People are breathing this in. They're not going to be drinking water. They're also going to be drinking water that either has waste products from factories, like, chemicals used to produce goods. Any sort of waste from the factory is going to be dumped in the river. And the rivers also even have human waste. Hence, diseases like cholera, asthma, and even cancer are going to lead to a lot of death and contribute really to a lower life expectancy for the urban industrial classes. No one living in this type of environment is going to live to a ripe old age. If the cholera outbreaks don't eventually get them, the working conditions in the factories just might. Speaking of working conditions in factories, the working conditions for factory workers were pretty grim. Mass production of goods in factories is really going to be great for feeding and clothing the masses, but it's going to be dangerous for the actual workers running the machines. The hours for these jobs are really, really long. There's no such thing as a 40-hour work week or a weekend yet, and the pay is going to be really, really low. Now, if you take a look at this table, you can kind of compare the wages of different types of workers in the late 18th and 19th century. And what are the two groups that you see here that are paid the least? If you look closely here, you can see that women are paid significantly kind of less than men. If you also look closely, you can see that children under 11 are going to be paid the least, especially when compared to adults. This is significant because this is going to result in a lot of women and children going to work in factories simply because factory owners are going to prefer to pay the cheaper workers. A lot of men are going to lose their jobs as their wives and children are going to kind of end up toiling away in these factories. Why? Well, the factory owners want to pay their labor as little as humanly possible so that they can increase their profits. They can like make a lot more money if they keep the cost of their labor down. It's the same exact reason why McDonald's loves to hire teenagers such as yourselves. You're cheap. If they hired an adult, they'd actually have to pay them a decent wage. You don't need a lot. You live at home. You might just want a job for spending money. You also don't have a lot of other options at this point in your life. So you take that job at McDonald's for that very tiny, minuscule paycheck. Getting back to the Industrial Revolution, everyone in the entire family is going to have to work to help pay the bills, even children. Now, just remember that cheap labor tends to be exploited labor. Factory owners are hiring women and children simply because they're cheap. They can pay them less, and honestly, they can take advantage of them. Women and children are less likely to stand up to them and to kind of fight back against unfair treatment. As women and children replace men in these factories, what impact do you think that this is going to have? It's going to lead to a lot of men feeling depressed. You see, at this time, men were really supposed to be the breadwinners, and now they can't get hired as easily as their wives and children. This is going to lead to a lot of social problems like crime, alcoholism, and even suicide. You may remember from the urban game that we did in class, all of the cemeteries that we built for the exhausted, stressed out workers who turned to crime and the social life of the pub. Suicide rates in England first double and then triple in the early to mid 19th century. Clearly, urban life had a lot of casualties. And children, let's focus on them for a little bit. Children, they're basically going to spend, working class children that is, are going to spend 12 to 16 hour days working in factories is going to be a huge problem. The children of the Industrial Revolution are not going to have it so good, particularly working class children. They aren't in school, no summer vacation, they're working. And their jobs were often the most dangerous. Children are small and they have tiny, nimble little hands, which means that they can fit into the machine. So if the machine gets a snag, if something gets tangled up, if there's a working part that needs to be fixed, well, children are the ones that have these small little hands that can really fit inside of the machine. Well, this is obviously going to lead to a lot of mutilation, a lot of injuries, and even sometimes death. Children are also really small. So they're actually hired to work in a lot of coal mines. Remember, coal is really needed to power all the machines of the factories. And you can kind of see here that, when you think of a coal mine, it's underground. The shafts that they've dug underground might be very small and narrow. So a lot of times children are like small enough to fit in some of the really narrow spaces in the mine shafts. Remember, like before the Industrial Revolution, mine workers tended to be kind of adult men, who often would work in the mine over the winter when they weren't farming or working on a farm. But now, as a result of the Industrial Revolution, a lot of mine employees are going to be children who are going to spend like pretty much most of their lives underground, stooped over, and really, are going to be very weak, not have a lot of opportunities, certainly no time to go to school. This is going to definitely lead to shorter lifespans for working class children. They're going to be uneducated and as a result kind of unable to increase their status in life. Really, education is the way that you kind of better yourself. And if you're like spending your 6 out of 7 days a week working 12 to 16 hour days underground in a coal mine or in a factory, then you're not going to really have time to go to school. Okay. Now, obviously, the poor living and working conditions of the urban working class is going to lead to a lower life expectancy and a lower standard of living for them in many ways. But honestly, for most of the Industrial Revolution, for most people, standard of living actually goes up. It's kind of hard to wrap your mind around, but it's true. even though life is pretty difficult for the working class, overall, the standard of living goes up during this time. Don't believe me? Well, I have the numbers to prove it. Take a look at this graph. If you focus in on the part that I just highlighted, you can kind of see that life expectancy overall for people is rising between 1750 and 1900, which is kind of like the prime time for industrialization. That means for most people, the standard of living is getting better. And as a result, people are living longer. Okay. Up until now, we've really been focused on the negative impacts of industrialization, which were especially felt by the working class. But now I kind of want to take a look at some of the positive effects of industrialization. And then you can be the judge about which one outweighs the other. Industrialization clearly increases the standard of living, but how? Well, it all goes back to time and money. Factory production is much faster and cheaper than the old method of production. So now goods that are mass produced in factories are going to be cheaper and much more affordable. Like once the price of the iPhone X goes down to like something reasonable, us regular people may actually be able to afford to buy it. Right now, no. Just no. With mass production, goods are cheaper and more affordable. People can now buy things that used to be luxuries only for the rich and are going to be in the reach of regular people. This is also going to make food cheaper, and people are now going to be able to afford to feed themselves and have a little money left over to buy clothing and housewares. People of all social classes can now afford to buy things that were only things that the wealthy used to be able to have, even the working class. Before industrialization, people had like 2 outfits, unless you were like members of the really wealthy aristocracy. Yes, 2. One for every day and a special outfit for church on Sunday. Now, people, even the working class, are going to be able to buy multiple outfits. Obviously, the upper middle class, the middle class, they're going to have much nicer clothing. But even like working class people are going to be able to have like a closet with a couple of different outfits in it, even if they're pretty basic. Now, as we move up the social ladder, people are going to be able to buy more and more. Remember, if you're middle class, your life is going to be pretty good. You can afford to buy more than enough food, even special treats like exotic fruits from foreign lands, lots of fancy clothing, things to decorate your homes, and entertainment like Astley's Circus, the theater, fine dining at restaurants. Your children are educated and life is pretty good. If you're not the workers toiling away in the factories, that is. Which kind of like brings me to my final thoughts. The Industrial Revolution is clearly experienced differently depending on your social class. So do you think that the Industrial Revolution was overall more positive or more negative? Clearly, you could argue it either way. But do you think that the wealth and prosperity Europe is going to experience was justified if it came at the expense and downright exploitation of the working class? Should we care about the people that are producing the things we buy? Like that new iPhone X that I want? Should I care about who produced it and how they were treated? These are some difficult questions, I know. But like that's why the study of history is so interesting, in my opinion. And I look forward to kind of hearing your answer to my questions in class tomorrow. So I'm going to leave you there for now. Remember, any questions that you have, anything that you need clarification on, we'll discuss this in class. Bye for now.